Welcome back to Hex Ed Oz, where the sexiest thing you can be is a massive nerd. In this episode, I want to discuss LARP weapons. What makes them LARP specific, what not to take to a combat LARP and why, some general safety tips, and my impressions/recommendations of several commercially available brands of LARP weapon I see all the time at Cicadia. While my focus will be largely on melee or close quarter weapons, I'll add a little info concerning ranged weaponry and even battle spells right at the end. So, shall we dance? The first thing you'll need to know is that LARP weapons are not your regular toy swords, nor are they real steel or wooden, despite some looking pretty legit. While there are no doubt LARPs who allow for blunted steel or wood, and I for one would love to see their insurance documentation because yikes, most weapons considered safe for LARP or LARP safe are made from a semi-flexible fiberglass rod surrounded by several inches of foam padding, whether injection molded foam or straight up foam pads cut to shape. Medieval reenactors, HEMA, Buhurt, can all afford to use wood or steel due to hefty safety gear requirements, including but not limited to actual battle quality armor, vital point coverage, hand protection, face and eye protection, groin protection. Not to mention, folks who indulge in those fights tend to know they're going to get walloped. Most of them love it. LARPers, on the other hand, are generally down for a good story rather than a solid but friendly beating, and want to show off their fancy costumes, which are often more fantastical than realistic, thus less likely to protect in a real fight. Showing up with real weapons to a LARP is likely to, in all honesty, scare the crap out of attendees and get you banned if you refuse to leave them in your car. Remember, LARP is a soft combat sport, assuming combat is permitted at your event at all. On a similar note, don't use plastic toy weapons, as these are often pointed in a way that can seriously endanger your friends, and even the mold lines on the edge of a plastic blade, if drawn across skin, can leave nasty burning cuts. Having been on the receiving end, stick with foam, believe me. Before moving on, there is one exception to what I've just said: long pikes. At present, I've been to 2 Australian battle games, Battlecry and Swordcraft, where long polearms can have a certain amount of their haft made from wood. This is because fiberglass over a certain length will whip unrealistically and often break, and also because when fighting from 3+ meters away, having only a meter or so of your weapon coated in foam is a less dangerous prospect for your opponent. Just make sure the foam is on the end facing them, yeah? Additionally, I've seen long pike users being given extra training to ensure they fight in such a way that risk is minimized, and folks who like to defend against them are taught to block strategically. On that, there are some pretty universal safety tips for wielding LARP weapons in such a way that people won't be constantly glowering at you or walking away with a bloody nose. 1. Avoid strikes to the head. I am yet to attend a single event or read a rule set in which striking the head was okay. In Cicadia, clipping your opponent in the head actually causes you to lose a hit point. Whether this is to allow for players to wear fantasy species prosthetics like horns, big ears, flaming hair, which would prevent use of a helmet, or simply because the game is set in a world where helmets are rare, before attending an event, you want to start training your muscle memory to avoid head strikes. Take your weapon, if you already own one, or a rolled up magazine, cardboard tube, even a stick if you don't, and move through what is called the 6 cuts. It's based on saber technique and used in a lot of other styles, and it goes like this. Slice your weapon through the air directly in front of you as though reaching out for an opponent, starting from your right shoulder to your left hip. Keep your arm at full extension. Then do the same movement, but from your left shoulder to right hip. Then turn your wrist and reverse the motion from right hip to left shoulder, followed by an upwards diagonal slash from left hip to right shoulder. Finish with a horizontal sweep from right to left at chest height, and then sweep back the other way from left to right. Once you're comfortable running through these 6 motions in sequence, start to mix them up. You can even get a friend to call out the number of each strike at random while you make corresponding movements. A note on the 6 cuts. In saber fighting, there are actually 8 cuts, with the final 2 going straight down, then straight back up. 1 strike to the skull, 1 to the groin. These 2 motions, when performed with a LARP weapon, will probably not be fatal, but they can be really uncomfortable or temporarily debilitating. and smacking a bud right in the eye can lead to serious trouble, not to mention guilt. 2. Pull your blows. In a real fight with a sword, a machete, a wrench, you don't want to tap at your opponent. To really cause some damage and eliminate the threat, you put enough force into your blows to hopefully cleave muscle and bone. It's all pretty grisly grunt work. You're basically aiming through your enemy. In a friendly LARP setting, however, it's generally frowned upon to have your weapons whistle through the air at bone-jarring speed. Given the light weight of LARP weapons, it's very possible to fight swiftly, but aim to land your blows on your target rather than through them. An alternative way of describing pulling your blows is to drastically reduce the power of your swing right before the moment of impact. I find that most people will have a very different opinion of what drastically reduced power looks or feels like, so always fight a little softer when you first join a LARP, at least until you get a feel for what regular attendees are comfortable with. This goes double for already tall, heavy-set or muscular players because you will naturally hit harder without meaning to. Final thought on this point. LARP is like paintball in that some bruises are bound to pop up from time to time, but horrible purple welts really shouldn't be happening unless the organisers want that sort of game. To each their own. 3. Never blind strike. Let's face it, combat can be chaotic and sometimes reflexes take hold. That said, when fighting from behind a shield or barricade, make sure you can see enough of your target to ensure you won't accidentally swing into their head. Standing against a wall and blindly swiping at the other side is a surefire way to hurt or upset someone, and this can also apply to what are called wrapping strikes around enemy shields. If you can't see their face, swing low or not at all. Flailing behind you as you run away is also frowned upon, since a sprinting enemy can't even slow down fast enough to avoid your inconsiderate attack. 4. Block down or to the side. Blocking a weapon by sweeping your own up and underneath it pushes that weapon closer to your face as it closes. Blocking downwards or out to the side, however, ensures that the weapon, if it connects, will strike you in a less uncomfortable spot and can open up your opponent for a counterattack too. My favourite direction to block an attack is to direct it across my foe's body, opening up their striking side and sometimes causing them to become tangled with their own secondary weapon or shield. Blocking down also forces your enemy to exert strength to raise it back up again, slowly tiring them if they happen to carry a larger weapon. Try it out. Thank me later. 5. Drum rolling and pull cueing. While not usually a safety issue, rat-a-tatting two single-handed weapons at breakneck speed, like performing a drum roll, has been a no-go for every combat LARP or battle game I've ever been to. Landing a dozen light paper cuts on a real enemy would hurt them, sure, but probably not stop them, at least not the way a single solid smack would. So whilst we don't want you to strike too realistically, each strike should be distinct from the last and land with enough force to make a soft thud. The same goes for pull cueing, which is a similar concept but performed with a polearm or similarly lengthy weapon. Poking at someone machine gun style with the very tip of a spear will rarely deal hit point damage at any LARP. 6. Point your weapon forwards. Again, not so much a safety tip as a useful pointer for first-timers. We all love shows and films in which fighters strike up cool poses. Obi-Wan holding his fingers out and his lightsaber beside his ear. Anime characters who heft a great sword over their shoulder one-handed. While aesthetically impressive, a smart enemy will launch their attack at Obi-Wan's unprotected hand or stab the anime protagonist in their wide-open torso. Neither, against an equally fast or skilled opponent, will have time to put their own weapon in the way, barring use of the Force or Jutsu, that is. If you hold your weapon towards your opponent, they now have to get through the length of the weapon to even touch you, and, bonus, your weapon is already in the perfect position for your reflexes to snap it into an interception, without having to move more than a few inches in most cases. LARP is a game where you really have to fight your opponent. There's no dice here, so don't rely on fictional media. Take your fighting lessons from real life and real history. To cap off this section, a quick disclaimer. Combat LARPs and battle games are contact sports, and just like any other contact sport, accidents do happen. By entering combat, you need to accept that you will get hit. you might get hit somewhere uncomfortable. And you need to remember that the average player isn't trying to seriously hurt you, so don't take it personally. If you're not ready to take a shot somewhere ouchy, invest in adequate protection, whether it be a groin cup, some armor, protective goggles, assuming your LARP allows non-immersive safety gear, or consider avoiding combat entirely in favor of pure roleplay. There's no shame in that. Moving on. What weapon should I get? LARP weapons come in every shape and size imaginable, so let me start with some basic concepts for consideration that should apply to most LARP settings. 1. For beginners, keep it cheap, keep it simple. If you've never picked up a sword before, you're better off avoiding anything too long or too fancy. In a medieval setting, just choose a single-handed sword or club. In a post-apocalyptic setting, get yourself a crowbar or some other sword equivalent. With such a weapon, you will get the hang of basic fighting motor mechanics in no time, and most of what you learn wielding it can then be applied to more exotic tools. Polearms and two-handers tend to be expensive when compared to basic melee weapons, so you're better off getting the hang of how your LARP works and how you like to roll around in it before committing to them. That said, while I always try to keep costs low for entry to our hobby, in my experience, LARP weapons purchased from a retailer for less than $100 are more than likely to break during early use. Yeah, I'm sorry to say it. They simply aren't made to an adequate quality for use in most LARP games. By all means, grab a $30 LARP sword from a Ren fair for your little niece or nephew to play with, but if you mean to use it against folk your own size, please think again. Now, if you've got a few battles under your belt and money ain't an issue. 2. Reach is king. There's a reason why, when given the choice between a sword and a spear, in real life, most professional soldiers pre-gunpowder, they chose the spear. If cost and your own physical capabilities allow, choosing a slightly longer weapon is usually going to give you an advantage. Unless, that is, you have real martial arts experience with shorter weapons. Eskrima certainly comes to mind, and it's a martial art I recommend to all wannabe dual wielders. If you don't have the luxury of reach or the ambidextrous deftness for dual wielding, a shield is one of the best ways to level the playing field. 3. Watch your weight. The lighter your weapon, the quicker it strikes, but the heavier your weapon, the better it blocks and the harder it is to block. Not that you should hammer your enemy's weapons away, that's unsportsmanly and risks injury or damage to lighter weapons, it's just that the added oomph can cause grips to slip. You want to find the right weight for your playstyle. Always on the attack? Lighter weapons. Heavy on defense? Heavier weapon. Bit of both, going for an all-rounder feel? Find a weapon that you can hold outstretched as though guarding against a foe for about a minute. If you buy a weapon and find it's just a touch heavy for you, hold it outstretched every day until you can maintain that minute. Basic strength training, especially in the back and shoulders, makes for a better fighter, hands down. 4. Make your vision a reality. AKA, if you like it, then you better put a ring on it. Despite the last 2 points, you might really just want to play a character who only uses tiny knives. If your character concept is more important than mere victory, don't let anyone dissuade you. Not even me. There are plenty of ways to overcome a disadvantage. Your knife fighter might rely on stealth, not open combat, or use alchemical and scientific means to entrap their victims rather than putting themselves in danger. There are also lots of YouTube videos and websites that can offer advice on self-defense techniques and historical combat that will help you mitigate the shortfalls of your chosen armaments. You could also just take legit lessons in a martial art with applicable movements. I've already mentioned Eskrima, but training in Kendo is a fantastic way to improve your longsword or katana skills. 5. To chain or not to chain? Many LARPs outright ban the use of chained weapons such as flails or nunchaku, as they are difficult to control once a swing has been initiated. Cicadia, for example, only allows such weapons for veteran players who've demonstrated a high level of skill with them. If your LARP does allow such weapons, practice a lot, and take extra care to avoid headshots. Aim for the arms, torso, and legs. Oh, another 2 things. The chain of a chained weapon should still be made of foam or soft leather, and if the chain of your weapon wraps around an enemy weapon, don't yank on it, just let it go. A real chain against a real blade will rattle and not break. But you might tear the LARP chain completely, or worse, cause tears on your opponent's weapon. And LARP weapons aren't easy to replace, my friends. 6. Hooking weapons. Something to consider when you purchase an axe, scythe, or really any weapon where the striking surface branches out from the haft. In real life, such weapons were extremely useful for hooking enemy weapons, shields, or limbs, and dragging them out of position. In a LARP setting, such weapons, given they're made of foam, not steel, they're not nearly as suited for such a notion. Not only is it rare to find a LARP where sweeping your opponent's leg out from under them is okay, you're actually more likely to just have the blade of your weapon tear clean off. If you are dead set on hooking shields, you can reinforce the blade by wrapping fabric around both it and the haft, but you should prepare yourself for a torn weapon anyway. Side note, there are some LARP retailers just beginning to release axes with a fiberglass core which sprouts out into the beard of the axe, making them somewhat useful for hooking, but I still recommend tempering your expectations and reinforcing them with fabric, just in case. 7. Beware of replicas. I've seen some incredibly pretty LARP replicas of Sauron's mace, Philly's hammer, and other movie or video game props. The issue with them is that outside of generic swords like Narsil, they're often made dangerously heavy, have jutting edges which really punch into anyone you hit, or they feature exposed coreless details which constantly catch on enemy weapons and armor and just tear off. When used on set, the weapons themselves were likely not used to actually hit any stuntmen, outside of John Rhys-Davies famously smashing folks around with his Gimli axe. And when they broke, they likely had replacements brought out between takes. You won't have the same luxury, so just be cautious when purchasing. 8. Ask questions. As with anything LARP related, it pays to ask veteran players or the retailers themselves if you want to be sure of something. Explain to them what you are hoping to achieve and let them offer their expertise. As for retailers, while there are lots of fine companies and even individuals from whom you can source your war gear, let me make some recommendations based on the products I've seen in use or even held myself. This list is going to be Australia-centric, but only in that these folks are accessible in Oz. You can still reach out to them from other parts of the world, and particularly in Europe, you can probably walk in rather than waiting for delivery. 1. Epic Armory. Epic are near and dear to Cicadia, as not only have they made us affiliates, allowing for our players to receive group order discounts, they're our go-to when recommending gear to new players. This is due to cost and variety, but their durability and ease of maintenance is nothing to be sniffed at. Their new Vanguard range will cost anywhere between 120 to 140 Aussie dollars, but each weapon will last you a figurative lifetime. They're designed with plenty of heft, zero maintenance in mind, and I've heard them described as earthquake-proof more than a few times. I have Epic Armory swords from older ranges that I still use over a decade after I purchased them. Honestly, just reliable as hell weapons. Aside from their Vanguard stuff, they also have a Stronghold range that is especially durable, a battle-worn range of weapons that look like they've seen use. I think these are especially cool for mercenaries, orcs, and other rough characters. They have a ton of polearms and other advanced choices, and their Darkmoon range is full of post-apoc and sci-fi weapons, from baseball bats to lead pipes to chainswords. 2. Kalimassil. Kali weapons are generally considered elite for folks who want to fight as realistically as possible. The weight of their weapons makes them feel like the real deal, and also makes them fantastic for blocking. In fact, I know several reenactors who will crack out Kali weapons when they want to practice, but they can't be bothered strapping on their full safety gear. A really basic Kali sword will set you back about 150 Australian dollars and will have a serviceable appearance, but they also have fancier and obviously more costly choices too. I especially like their greatswords. 3. Atelier's Nemesis. Nemesis weapons are gorgeous. They are also priced accordingly, so expect to fork out between $220 and $450 for a longsword. Aside from the attention you'll garner having one of these pretty ladies strapped to your hip, they're also, in general, a dream to be struck by, as they're often spongier internally than other brands, at least in my experience. As an added side note, Nemesis are known for doing custom jobs, making a LARP weapon to your specifications, so most that I've actually seen in use have been personalised for their bearer. 4. Elysian Forge. The last recommendation I have is an Aussie company, who I've run into at various fairs and LARP events. Lovely people. Their specialty is curved weapons, so think sabres, cutlasses, Egyptian khopesh. They wield similarly to Nemesis weapons with the same internal texture, and I own one of their cavalry sabres, which cost me about $280. I use it as my field battle sword, for when my shorter cutlass just won't cut it. Get it? I'll see myself out. You can go straight to the websites of these companies and order from there, though it pays to attend medieval fairs and events such as Comic-Con, where various vendors will stock them too. In fact, I'd like to give a shout out to Aussie-based Of Science and Swords, and Avi Burnshaw, who runs the venture. They stock an assortment of the brands I've mentioned, working particularly close with Epic Armory, and we often run demos either with them or beside them at local fairs and conventions. Avi is actually one of the several people who recommended I give podcasting a go, and is a well-known figure in the Australian LARP and battle game community. If he suggests a weapon for you, best believe it'll be a good choice. Now, I should probably mention homemade weapons. If your game allows for them, you can certainly get some foam, a heat gun, a length of fiberglass rod for the core. If you can, always get a rounded rod rather than square, as square rods tend to hit quite a bit harder. And then you can just go and build your own weapon. The thing is, the supplies might end up costing you almost as much as a professionally made weapon, and if not, it won't end up half as durable. Most homemade weapons are also less aesthetically pleasing, and you have to be cautious about choices such as, what kind of glue should I use? As in this example, the wrong kind can dry out and make the foam less flexible, making for a weapon that could genuinely hurt someone. What I'm trying to say is, if you can buy a pre-made weapon, I reckon you should try and do so. If not, watch as many tutorials as you can before starting, and double check with your LARP group if certain building choices are prohibited. That is, of course, purely my opinion, and isn't reflective of LARP groups, particularly local groups in America where every player uses homemade, often referred to as boffer, weapons. If homemade suits your LARP community, all the power to you. I'm going to finish with some thoughts on ranged weapons, as I'll probably cover shields, armor, and everything else at a later date. Throwing weapons such as shuriken or throwing knives are generally expected to be coreless. Because of this, they're lighter than other LARP weapons and won't have the range of a real throwing weapon. Plan accordingly, and practice throwing them at mid-ranges, because anything further away than about 20 paces is probably going to result in a miss. Important note here, don't throw any weapon with a core, such as a LARP spear, because once they leave your hand, you can no longer control exactly how they're going to land, and no one likes taking a hard pommel to the teeth. Bows can be sourced from regular archery stores, with plain black fiberglass recurve bows making for a good beginner weapon. There are also fancier LARP-specific bows available from most LARP retailers. When using a bow, you need to consider 3 things. 1. You need to check the draw poundage allowed at your LARP. At Cicadia, we max out at 30 pounds. Anything above that, we believe is likely to just result in injury. 2. You should avoid buying a modern-looking hunting or sporting bow, unless that is your LARP is set in an appropriate time period. 3. Check what LARP arrows your group allows. Some groups allow generic foam-tipped practice arrows. Most will be happy though with what are called IDV arrows. These are designed so that accidental shots to the eye will bounce from the eye socket, and while still uncomfortable, at least you keep your vision. Using arrows tipped with cork, or just the shaft with no head at all, is never going to fly at a LARP event. Side note. LARP crossbows operate much like LARP bows, but you need to check the legality of using them in your region, as in Australia, crossbows aren't permitted by law. Band guns, much like crossbows, need to be carefully managed for the sake of avoiding fines or legal action. In Australia, they need to resemble single-shot muskets or old-timey pistols, otherwise any police wandering by will be very, very upset with you. You also want to check what sort of band is used by your group. At Cicadia, we use blue surgical tubing, as certain types of tubing can lead to vicious bruises or snap while they're being loaded. Nerf guns are generally only seen in post-apocalyptic, modern, or sci-fi LARPs, and you'll want to avoid making them look too realistic. Once again, don't upset the cops. Be prepared also for lots of emu bobbing to pick up dozens, scores, even hundreds of Nerf darts at the end of an event. Not for me, thank you. Spell tags are a thrown representation of a ranged or battle spell, and some groups will allow for foam balls, while others will ask for balloons filled with bird seed. Always use seed appropriate for the local bird species, just in case of a spill. Other groups will allow for a mixture of the two types. Spell tags are perhaps the easiest ranged weapons you can make for yourself, so all you mages out there should be thankful. No matter the ranged weapon, in most Australian LARPs I've attended, there's a limit to the amount of ammunition you can carry, and once that ammunition leaves your weapon or your hand, it is expended and can't be reused until the end of the fight. Therefore, it's always my recommendation that you keep a melee sidearm with you, even if you plan to focus on ranged combat. You will end up needing it eventually. I'm pretty sure this has turned into a lengthy episode, and I'm sure you've all got stuff to do, people to see, so let's just call it there. I hope this has been helpful. I've been Chris, this has been Hex Ed Oz, and I hope to catch you all again soon.